Webinar: Curiosity, Creativity and Empathy. Just some of the social and emotional skills which schools, teachers and indeed parents want to see children learn and develop. But how should they do this? And can and should schools become hubs for social and emotional learning? I'm Duncan Crawford from the OECD. Today, we're going to explore these issues and learn about ways teachers can support students to develop these skills, which undoubtedly can help them succeed in education and later life. I'm glad to say I'm joined by a fantastic panel of quality guests who I'm sure are extremely social and sometimes emotional in terms of skills anyway. Professor Patrick Newell from the Graduate School of Leadership and Innovation at Shizuoka University in Japan, who was also national partner with the OECD to implementing a social and emotional skills survey. Pedro Cunha, the Director General for Education in Portugal, joined us as well. Professor Stephanie Jones from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, who also leads EASL, their Social Emotional Learning Lab. And last but not least, Hannah Elferts, an OECD analyst who also led recent work on social and emotional skills at the OECD. Thank you all of you for joining us. Before we start, to those of you watching, do please get involved. If you have questions for the panel, send them in via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens on your Zoom feed. You can also, if you're following us on Facebook, send in questions as well. Now, though, let's get things started. We're going to start with Hannah, who is going to give us an overview about the importance of social and emotional skills. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Duncan. So let me just share my slides. Can you see them well? Yes. Yes, I have now the pleasure to present you with some very new results of the survey on social and emotional skills. And they actually address the key question that gave a little bit the inspiration for this webinar. Are schools ready to be hubs of social and emotional learning? And first of all, as Duncan said, a very important question is, why should we care? Why are they important, social and emotional skills? And actually they are important because they are relevant for individual success and well-being, but also for the success and well-being of societies. Yeah, and what are we talking about when we talk about social and emotional skills? As Duncan already said, we are talking about empathy, responsibility, but also creativity, sociability, stress resistance, or curiosity, among others. These are just a few examples. And actually, our study, as much as other research, shows that it's important for social relations, but also for a range of other outcomes, such as civic engagement, physical health and well-being and life satisfaction, but also actually for academic achievement and for prospect in the labor market. And they are also important for societies as a whole. They are, you can say, the glue that holds our societies together. And they are also important for a prosperous and peaceful future. And this is why they have become a top priority in many countries around the globe. And this is why the OECD launched its first international survey on social and emotional skills in 2019, where we measured the skills across very diverse contexts from very different regions. As you can see, all of them participated as cities. And the first important result that was published in our international report, that actually we see a dip in skill. Social and emotional skills dip when students get older, because if we compare 15 to 10-year-olds, then actually we see that 10-year-olds report higher skills on almost all of the skills that we measured, except for tolerance and assertiveness. And there are a lot of different reasons, of course, leading to this, but I think we still should ask ourselves, what can schools do about it? Is there anything that teachers can do? And I think there's a lot that can be done in schools, because schools actually are a perfect hub of social and emotional learning, because they really give us an opportunity to experience success, to build trusting relationships, sometimes even friendships, and also to experience that our success very often depends not just on our own, but also on others. The question is, however, are schools ready for it? And the first thing that we need to understand is they really acknowledge that academic achievement and social and emotional learning are two sides of the same coin. They go really hand in hand. And when we look at the results, then actually we see it's quite encouraging, because the majority of 15-year-olds and also 10-year-olds are on schools that acknowledge that academic achievement is an important aim, but they are also acknowledging that social and emotional skills are an important aim. However, if we then look into what's really happening, then actually we see some important differences. For example, these skills are less assessed. If we look at results from PISA 2018, for example, the majority of 93% of 15-year-olds are on schools that actually systematically keep record of students' test results. If we look at our results across cities, then actually we see that social and emotional skills of only 66% of 15-year-olds are being assessed. And that's actually significantly less than for 10-year-olds. Which I think is not a good signal, because as we've seen, there is this dip. We should know where our students stand to be able to promote them exactly as much as they need. And another important question is, of course, are these skills actively promoted? And if we look here at the results, then actually we see that yes, the majority of students are on schools that promote these skills on a range of, or with a range of different approaches, but most of them do this embedded into their everyday practices, such as general school practices, or they request teachers to promote these skills as part of their job. It's listed as an objective. They also provide feedback and advice to parents, and also through the disciplinary rules of the schools. Less so with very specific activities that target these skills, such as extracurricular activities or separate classes or activities, or classes as part of regular classes that are really targeting these skills. And of course, there are many ways to embed also the social and emotional skill promotion into mathematics and reading and content delivery, but there is a risk of not paying enough attention because we know the curriculum is quite packed, and often there might be a risk of dropping some of these activities. I also want to highlight that here we observe an important difference. Teachers of 10-year-olds, the blue bar, we see they are more requested to promote social and emotional skills, and they also work more with parents, giving them feedback and advice on their children's skills. And again, if we think of the results, then this is actually not a good one, because of course parents remain an important partner. And teachers, of course, are an important engine of social and emotional education. And importantly, we also found that all of these approaches, teachers who are in schools that actually do these things, they have a higher self-efficacy, better student-teacher relationship, and they use more active learning pedagogies. And all of this, as we know, is important for an effective social and emotional education. So as we have seen, a lot of schools actually build on teachers as being the engines of social and emotional education. But we also know it's quite challenging to really devote those thoughtful, sustained, and systematic attention to these skills. And that, of course, requires a sophisticated set of knowledge and skills. And thus, teachers really need sufficient training and support. And if we look here, then actually the results show that around 30 to 20% have very much had the opportunity to learn about different topics related to social and emotional skill development, such as student-teacher interaction, child development, or developing social and emotional skills. But we also see here important differences, again, to the disadvantage of teachers of 15-year-olds. Less so with intermediate amount of input in pre and in-service training, but again, also with regard to those teachers that have less training. Here, teachers of 15-year-olds say more that they have no or little training. And again, we see that really significant training is important for a higher self-efficacy, better relationships, and more active learning pedagogies. And I want to stress significant because we observe here a dosage effect. just a little bit of training, a one-shot workshop doesn't do the job. It really needs to be something impactful. So I think we can all agree that turning schools into hubs of social and emotional learning requires a really holistic approach. And I'm happy that we now have a very elaborate panel here that can help to put some pieces together and show how this can happen. The spotlight could only highlight a few of them. And actually, it shows that it's really important to ensure that these skills are part of the evaluation and assessment practices. We really need to ensure that sufficient time and attention is paid to those skills. And it's also important to stress that a whole school approach should be adopted that includes really parents as partners of skill promotion beyond primary school. They remain important. And last but not least, we need to provide our teachers, our engines, with sufficient support and training. So thank you very much. And if you want to know more, then you can just reach out, or you can read our new spotlight. Here's the link, or more on the survey in general here on our website. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Absolutely fascinating. Lots of interesting things to delve into there. So let's get straight to it. Pedro Cunha, Portugal's Director General of Education. Let's turn to you first. In Portugal, how much focus is there on this? How much importance is placed on developing social and emotional skills in children?
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today and to share and to learn with all you around the world. Yeah, it has been a big priority for us since the last curriculum reform that has been undergoing since 2016. We produced a student profile, which is a vision of what we want at the end of compulsory school age, which is 18 years old here in Portugal. And surprisingly, before that, we didn't have a clear vision of what we want out of schools besides a lot of academic learning. So what else do we want out of schools? So after we designed, it was a very participatory approach that we started with students. We asked them, what shall we get from schools and what can they give to schools? And then we asked parents, then we asked teachers, and the whole nation got involved in a debate on this very simple question: what do we want out of schools? And it was a very clear response from the nation saying, well, we want them to know things, but we also want them to be and to feel and to engage with the world and with others around them. So with that profile, we readjusted the curriculum of all subjects in the country, and we created space in the curriculum. We created time, and we allowed schools with increased autonomy for them to manage freely. Part of the curriculum time, 25%, the schools have the freedom to use that time as they want in order to achieve this vision of a common profile. So this really changed the view in the country on the role and the focus on social and emotional development in our children.
So I wonder then, Pedro, is there an issue in Portugal which was raised by Hannah there, which we're seeing in other countries, where teachers of 10-year-olds are more intensively trained in terms of giving social and emotional education than for 15-year-olds?
You could say that. We don't have data on that as you do. You could say that because it is linked with the type and the kind of initial teacher preparation they get. Secondary school teachers, they get a different training than those teachers that go to basic education. And within basic education, they have a strong focus on pedagogy, on child development, on human relations, which is not the case for secondary education teachers. Sorry. So you could say that it's arguably the case, but we don't have data on that.
Okay. Patrick, let's turn to you and get a perspective from Japan. What's the role of social and emotional skills in Japan, or indeed across Asia more generally, if you have some insights about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Asia's 48 countries, so it's a little bit hard to group Asia all together. But typically, Asian countries are very much kind of a collective society. And so the others matter. It's much more of a we perspective that we see in Asia. And we see that very strongly in Japan. And what's interesting is that there hasn't been really so much explicit social and emotional skills per se in Japan. But if you think about, I'll give you an example of a 6-year-old child who would walk to school on their own, arrive at school, and there would be some of the students bowing and welcoming them. They take their shoes off, they go into the school, they enter their classroom. Before class starts, they bow and they so there's a lot of things built in where they bring lunches, they clean the school. There's a lot of kind of cultural things that are built in. And if you look carefully at the different, for example, the OECD skills, the 15 that have been articulated, you can see a lot of parallels there. And just in 2017, the Japanese government decided to create a moral education program. And it's kind of a movement towards this. And right now in Japan, there's a really strong emphasis on non-cognitive skills. And how do you measure those? And so that's been, it's happening, I think, just naturally through this collective society, through people thinking about each other and what it means much more about the other than themselves, together with the Japanese government now really looking at this carefully and saying, how can we be more human? And another interesting thing that I've noticed is a lot of Japanese people have kind of forgotten what it means to be Japanese, because after World War II, it became very much about the West and kind of an Anglo-Saxon leadership style. And now you're seeing this shift back to Asia. It's Asia's turn right now. If you look at the growth that's happening, you look at just the development around the world, it's Asia's turn. And so now we're seeing this shift back more towards this kind of different style of leadership or this collective society. And so it's fascinating, actually.
It strikes me by what you just said there, when we're having this debate, are we actually at risk of putting too much pressure on teachers to achieve something when actually it might be more down to the culture of the country and the life skills and values embedded in children by their parents?
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing because, Japan is one of the most homogeneous countries in the world. I think it ranks 157th, and then South Korea is 158th, and North Korea is 159th, to give you the context of things, right? So you have a very homogeneous country, and for example, in Japan, Shintoism and Buddhism are the two largest religions by far. So you have a homogeneous country with two main religions, and almost of them are equally popular, depending on the scenario. And so it's a lot less than, like you would say, maybe in the West or other countries where it's like, no, I'm going to teach my child my values. And it's not the school's place to do that. So it's a little bit different of a mindset, I think, in Asia in general, especially in Japan.
Stephanie, I'd be intrigued to find out what you think about this, and also in your view, how big a role should teachers have in effective social and emotional education?
That is such a great question. And I think particularly right now, it can be a little bit of a sensitive one in the United States. There's, so even before I get into it, I will say thank you for holding this webinar. It couldn't be more important right now. And we've seen with the pandemic that children are really struggling, that educators are struggling, and there's lots of need. So I'm so glad you're doing this. I'm also so glad that you're collecting all these data. It couldn't be more helpful to this challenge that we have, which is really to have information that both guides us and gives us feedback about the efforts that we're making. So thank you. Lots of gratitude to your organization for doing that. I mean, my view about social and emotional skills is that they undergird everything that we do. So if we really look at the tasks that we engage in every single day, in school, at home, in relationships, and we break them down, they are fundamentally supported by social and emotional skills. And so that is happening at home and supported at home. And it's happening at school and is supported at school. So it's not, in a funny way, it's not like we have a choice, because social and emotional skills are happening all the time. And the kinds of skills that really support academic learning, paying and shifting attention, managing behavior in the context of learning, coping with emotions that arise when things are difficult, those are all foundational to academic work in schools. So it's really hard to imagine how we could separate social and emotional learning and supports from schooling itself. So just as a starting point, I don't see how they can be disconnected from one another. That said, so everybody has a role to play. That said, there needs to be connection and engagement and conversation between the adult educators and parents about what's important and what they value. They could be different at home and school. You can work on them in different ways.
I was going to ask you, I mean, the title of this webinar is Should Schools Be Hubs for Social and Emotional Skills? But if we place all the burden on schools, is that letting the parents off the hook?
Again, it's happening all the time, whether we like it or not. So it's happening at home and it's happening at school because social and emotional skills are supported inside key relationships. And so I guess the question is, how can we be really intentional about the work we do in schools and at home and support those in those settings in the ways that make them most able to do the work most effectively? In schools, I think that is partly related to something that Pedro said at the very beginning, which is giving time and space and support. So educators, as you saw in your data, need and seek out training and support to do this work. They also value having a say in how it happens in their setting. So we've heard from many teachers we've worked with, educators across places around the globe, that they want some agency in this work because they know the students that they're serving. So that makes a big difference. And they need approaches that are innovative and span a continuum from highly scaffolded and curricular to more strategy-like and embedded. So it could be that teachers need one approach in one setting and a different approach in another.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Hannah, let's turn back to you quickly. If there's anything you want to react to what Stephanie was just saying, I'd be interested to hear it. But also a question has come in from Maya, who writes, is there a difference in the training for primary and secondary school teachers in general? And if so, why? Maybe you could answer that one.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to also jump in on the discussion of hubs and whether putting it on school means that we are actually taking it away, or parents can say, let's relax, it's not our job anymore. I think that's not the idea of a hub. A hub and a whole school approach means actually that everyone is on board, and the school is just the center of trying to coordinate, to support, because also parents need support, not just the teacher. It's a perfect place of supporting everyone with the child, of course, in the middle. And this is why, no, they are not off the hook, I would say. It's really this whole system that needs to work together, and schools play a pivotal role in this. And yes, it was already mentioned, in a lot of countries, actually, there is this difference of secondary and primary school teachers, where you have a training where one is very much focused on specific subjects, whereas the other one is more holistic, has more room also for discussing on child development and taking more care of these topics that are more of general pedagogical knowledge and not so much these very subject specific knowledge. And I think, yeah, that actually holds for many countries, and that might actually explain some of the differences, yes.
Thanks very much, Hannah. Let's explore a little bit more about the main challenges which schools and teachers are facing. Pedro, if I can come back to you. In Portugal, what is the situation? What's the biggest challenge at the moment that you're facing in this area?
Well, in what concerns SEL, I think we share the major challenges that other countries are living. So I would group them in three categories. One big chunk of challenges is related to perceptions. The second one would be around knowledge and data. And the third one would be on policies. So in terms of perceptions, sometimes you find a perception that, this is an extra burden. This is an extra content, an extra subject, an extra task for schools and teachers that are already struggling to deal and to cope with all the demands that are coming from, you know, all around. So, and this is a big one. There is a perception that this is adding to what already existed. That's why we decreased the contents of the curriculum and we created space in order to avoid this perception. Another one is on perception, is that this is something that you cannot assess. If you cannot assess it, it's not serious enough to have a place in school. And sometimes we get this reaction. Maybe it's because of the name. It started with the name soft skills, which is a terrible name because it's not soft. Stephanie can explain this a little bit better, but there's a strong cognitive component on a lot of these competencies or these skills. So that's also a perception. It is a misunderstanding about SEL. Another one is a perception that it is something that belongs to psychologists. And this is something that only psychologists can do. So it's expensive, it's scarce, it's rare, and it's like a vitamin S that you add to tired and overweighted curriculum. You add a vitamin S for SEL, and suddenly school will change and become better. So this is again a misunderstanding about SEL and the way it can get into school. The other one is already, as Stephanie mentioned, is on intentionality. All evidence is pointing to the evidence that you need a multi-layer intervention that mobilizes the whole community. A lot of the comments from our viewers are saying, what about families? What about communities? And they're totally right. This is something that the school alone cannot deal with. But there is something that the school can actually do something about it, and it can lead the way if they have the support and the resources they need. So this would be on perceptions. In terms of knowledge, as you've mentioned, we are not collecting a lot of data on this. As OECD is clearly leading the way, and we are very thankful for it, because it's placing this type of assessment in the same stance where we have, for instance, PISA. So the message is coming, which is, okay, this is as important as reading, counting, and science. And also in terms of knowledge is the teacher initial preparation and continuous professional development support. There's a big challenge there, and we are acting on it. We are launching a national program to teach trainers on this, teachers on SEL, because they didn't get the chance to learn this on their initial teacher education. And the last one on data collection and policies is that you have to put your money where your mouth is. So all governments agree this is a priority, but we have to look, how are we investing on this particular side? Secondly, for instance, in Portugal, we've just launched a national observatory for teacher and student SEL and well-being in order to follow schools around through the time and to learn how are these indicators evolving. So these are three categories of challenge that we face here.
Okay, so a lot of challenges outlined there by Pedro, and you mentioned Stephanie a few times. So let's go straight to Stephanie. I'll get your reaction to what Pedro just said. A lot of different challenges. You've done a lot of research in this area. What are your big concerns? And also, how do you tackle those challenges?
So I agree with all those challenges. And of course, if we had all the answers, we wouldn't have the challenges. But I think that there are a whole variety of ways to address some of the challenges, and Pedro's just described a whole bunch of them. And they have to do in some ways with taking the domain seriously at all levels and being quite explicit about what it is and what it means for all the other things that we care about. And that is, you know, building citizens and supporting academic growth and making schools and educators, making schools functional places and educators supported and happy in their work. And so being really clear about how social and emotional skills and supports are kind of a foundation for that. And I think also, as you both were saying, how schools can be a connector. A hub is one word, a connector is another for supporting all of this work. I will say a couple of other things that are both related to your question, but also about some of the other things that came up, which is that there has been, and in your data, there are pretty clear distinctions between what you're learning about the needs and the opportunities and the supports for 10-year-olds versus 15-year-olds. And this is well established in the literature, and it plays out also in the kind of curricular approaches that we see that are developed for the younger set and the older set. And one thing that we've seen in our review of many programs is that there just are fewer that are designed and are explicitly focused on social and emotional learning in that high school, that secondary period. And part of that is because there is a view that social and emotional skills are really something that is foundational and is built early and doesn't matter as much later. Not true. But also that social and emotional supports get woven into other approaches in that secondary period. You find them more in sort of health education, mental health and wellness. And so that doesn't mean they're not there. It's just how they look and play out is a little different. So before we give up on the older kids, I think we have to look closely and see where those social and emotional supports are in that secondary period and pull them out and again, make it really explicit. So back to your actual question, which is like, what do we do about all of this? I do think we have to build a very robust, a clear and captivating and not alarming communications campaign about how important these skills are to the things that we care about and to describe in detail how they go together. So some of these misperceptions have to do with this lack of clarity from us as a field about exactly where social and emotional skills sit in the educational constellation, and also how they change developmentally. What's important in early childhood and what's important later on. It's not always the same things all the time, and that can be confusing.
Well, hopefully we'll get more clarity in the rest of this webinar where some more of the solutions hopefully will be proposed. Let's go to Patrick to get his reaction to all of that. And I suppose specifically, you already outlined how the culture in Japan is obviously different to many other parts of the world. So are there any particular challenges in Japan or regional challenges which we wouldn't be seeing elsewhere?
I think there's a couple things, right? What I noticed is from Japan and some other Asian countries is that this concept of being unique is more of a challenge, because what you see a lot of times in Asia is it's about being one and it's about being together. And so you see the opposite very often in some of the Western countries. It's about me, I am special, and building the confidence and awareness there. So I think there's a difference there. But if I could back up a little bit, over the last 30 years, I've been deeply involved with education, but also have been outside of education. And it's absolutely bizarre we're even having this conversation to me. And if you look at, what's happened, World Economic Forum, the skills that they lay out, yes, technology is, the time and skills is really important, but right behind that is social emotional skills. If you look at the amount, same thing with McKinsey, the report McKinsey came out with showing that, again, technology is the area that we're going to put a lot of time and energy, but right behind that is social emotional skills. And, I often think about, why do we go to school? What is the purpose of school? Is it about math and science and reading? Yes, there's a certain aspect of that. But we have this whole group of humans that we can bring together and raise our level of creative collective intelligence and create things and make a better world together. So it's just so bizarre to me that we're even having this discussion. I'd like to just share that point. And I look at it, and you look at the whole, ChatGPT and what's happening there. And, I think it was 1980 something when they said, oh, we should ban calculators from school. Right. And then it was the internet. And now we're talking about ChatGPT. And where's the balance and harmony? And so, yeah, again, it's so fascinated with the mindset in this whole conversation, because it really is about being human positive.
Patrick,
and how does technology support that? Sorry, go ahead, Duncan.
So I just wonder, from what you just said, because there seems to be broad agreement about the importance of this and how it should be given equal weighting, so to speak, with academic side of schooling and things like that. But if you put more time and energy, if teachers have to do that into social and emotional teaching, doesn't that inevitably possibly take away time from the academic side, which could potentially impact grades? And if that is then detrimental to students in the longer term, parents could complain. I'm just thinking out loud here. Could that be an issue that you come up against if you are promoting this more and more in schools?
Can I go first, Stephanie? Is that all right? I can see both. You're ready to jump on this. I can see you're ready to jump on this. I would say, one, there's already a lot of evidence that shows the academics will increase with a higher level of social emotional learning, right? So that alone, and the more data we have to show that, especially in the Asian countries, which are so test driven and there's so much competition, right? So I think that's one. The second is, it's really about integration. And if you look at good practice, if you look at inquiry-based learning, you look at province-based learning, you look at STEAM, right? The whole thing around STEAM right now is really about integration. And then it's how do we reflect? How do we work together? How do we understand the situation? How do we make responsible decisions is really what this is about. And so I sometimes struggle to some degree about standalone scenarios when to me, it's just about being human positive. It's about being good human beings. Now that can be taught at home, that can be taught at school. There's some religious implications depending on which countries you're coming from and that scenario. But if anything, I think it's a complete opposite.
Stephanie, you were nodding along there. Do you want to give your reaction to my obviously extremely stupid point I was putting out there?
No, but it's not a stupid point because it is a point that comes up frequently. So I think it's actually something that has to be really addressed head on and over and over and over again. Everything that Duncan suggested is exactly right, and I completely agree with it. It's not a zero-sum game. And, if we really want to rely on evidence, we know that interventions designed to focus on these skills specifically, when they are implemented and tested in randomized trials, not all of them, but some of them show a boost, this sort of academic spillover boost. And so that tells us that there is something about really focusing on these skills directly that carries over into all of the other things that we do in schools and care about. And so we should take that really seriously, but we should also take its implications for how we do the work quite seriously. And I think that has a lot to do with what Patrick just described, which is this kind of taking an integrated approach, which is not just that social and emotional skills are taught on Tuesday for 30 minutes, because that doesn't live up to their conceptualization, which is that they are foundational to all the things we do. That's an important thing to do, explicit teaching. But the other things that are really important to do that I don't think necessarily detract from the other instructional project of teaching and learning is creating environments that are perceived by children and adults as safe, caring, connected, where they feel that they belong and are seen and noticed. That's one key part of SEL. The other part is teaching it explicitly and noticing and providing opportunities to practice skills in math, at gym, in lunch, at after school, in sports. Like all of these other kind of learning settings have come up in the chat. And those are all places to practice skills in real time and have adults notice that you're doing it and comment on it and make it part of how we do coaching or how we do music or whatever it is. So none of that is an explicit detraction from academic work. It does demand genuine support for educators and thinking both about how we help them weave this into their practice, but also how we support them around their own mental health, their own social and emotional skills. So all of that is really important, and it takes real effort, time, commitment.
Thank you, Stephanie. And just to focus on some of the other challenges here, because Pedro earlier on mentioned the pressures on teachers. And we have a question here from Martin Henry, who's written and asking, how do we ensure social and emotional support for teachers? In the US and Canada, for example, teacher mental health is at an all-time low. UK teachers, for example, have walked out due to issues there. Pedro, how do you support teachers when they are already experiencing so many pressures in this regard?
That's a great question. And if you would ask me what would be my takeaway message out of this webinar, I would say start with teachers, because they're the ones who are needing the most now because of a lot of different reasons. And one of them is that they're, according to some studies, they're the third professional group that is most exposed to stress. And, you know, a brain that is exposed to stress, their executive functions are hindered. So memory, attention, control, they're all hindered. So they live, you know, it's hard to be a teacher every day. It's difficult. And you need a lot of support. And you have to fight this sense of being alone with a group of students. And also, we have to really focus on, you know, teachers' self-care and coping techniques, which is totally absent, at least for now, yet totally absent on initial teacher education, which is strange. Because if you look to the other two professional groups that are above teachers, which are military and urgency doctors, they both get a lot of training on how to deal with continuous and prolonged stress, which we don't do with teachers, at least here. So we really have to focus on that because it's a professional tool. And also their own emotional literacy about themselves, the way they feel, predicts the way they work with kids. And it's the link is also very strong. So teachers that have low SEL will have classes with a lot of disruptive behaviors, aggressive behaviors, etc. So yes, this is a total and absolute priority because we need to support teachers in all the ways we can.
Thank you for that, Pedro. And Hannah, can I just turn to you quickly, because we've had a question come in and I think it links to a degree to what we've just been discussing. Sharlata asks, what kind of specific training does an educator need to integrate social and emotional learning into their lessons?
Yeah, I think we already heard a lot of these things that are important. And I would also just want to highlight that, of course, we need to start by the well-being and social and emotional skills of teachers themselves. That's an important component. Also, as Stephanie said, maybe some teachers are actually using some of the practices that might be able to foster these skills, but they are not aware of this. But as she rightly said, so that's not sufficient because you need to explain, you need to make it explicit to be really effective. So just doing it as a side product is not enough. So you really need to explain and to enrich and to be aware of what you're doing and so on. So I think that's also important. And yeah, I think then, of course, for each subject, there are different ways creativity can be taught in all of the different subjects. For example, there are so many approaches and ideas out there, but you need to be very much aware of this. And also what you need to know is to understand these skills and how you can observe, how you can measure them, and how to provide students with the next step. Really adequate for where they are standing now. What will be the next step to go? Because you cannot challenge them too much, but you should not under-challenge them also, of course. So Stephanie was talking about scaffolding, and that's, I think, super important. And just another important point, if I may, is that, of course, some of the stresses also come actually from neglecting social and emotional skills of students. Some of the stresses that teachers are exposed to. We hear now that across countries, a lot of them are actually very much worried about bullying and about violence after COVID, and that causes, and also violence against teachers, by the way. And that causes a lot of stress. And maybe instead of teaching someone how to manage the classroom, it would be how to create a classroom where we are social and human beings, as Patrick said, to each other, and where we have respect and we welcome each other as individuals and we support each other.
Thank you, Hannah, for raising all of those points. Harriet Marshall has sent in a great question addressed to all of you. I don't know if all of you need to answer it, but I'll read it out. How can we raise the profile and importance of social and emotional learning in a performative-based education system? As always, Harriet writes, there is a real tension between the amazing ideas and evidence of those like being discussed right now that need to be prioritized, and the actual reality of a performative-based education culture and the narrow thinking that it's all about academic grades at the end of the day. Who would like to have a go at that one? There we go. Pedro's microphone he was the fastest microphone slinger in the West. Go for it, Pedro.
Sorry, Duncan, but this is not about competition. SEL is about collaboration. So I'm just giving a first step. Now, just to share, I've already mentioned this, but it depends on a discussion that every country, every region, every city has to have a discussion on what is performance. And you have to be very clear on that. And you have to invest time and energy to have that discussion. Because the question, it is implicit, a certain vision of performance. Performance is about, high stakes on national exams. This is one vision. But that's exactly what we've done in 2016 is let's have a debate, a discussion, a distended discussion. We didn't have an agenda on SEL. We didn't start saying we have to do SEL. We just asked questions. First of all, to students, then to teachers and parents. And the question was very simple. What do we mean by performance? What do we mean by end results? And if you ask that with no agenda, people will say, I want my kid to be happy, to grow healthy. That's what we want from us as educators. That's what they expect from us. So let's do it. Let's educate happy and healthy children.
You all did eventually raise your hands to answer the question. So Patrick or Stephanie, if you'd like to open your mic. There we go.
Oh, I just agree with Pedro. I mean, that's what I'm going to say every time. So yeah, so as I said before, to a different question, the conversation is actually already happening. So in the US, there is this weird conversation about whether or not, after 50 years of doing this work, about whether or not social and emotional learning has a place in schools, or more importantly, whether or not it's dangerous in some way. And so the conversation about what we value is happening, but it's not a structured or open conversation. It's not intentional. And so if we did have an intentional and open and scaffolded conversation about what we value from education, what we want for our children, the same kinds of things would rise to the top. We want children who are kind. We want children who are mentally and physically well. We want children who can collaborate with others to solve the problems that are coming. So that kind of thing rises up when you do large-scale surveys of adults about what they value. And so if we really had an open conversation about what we all want as adults from our education system, my guess is these same kinds of things would rise to the top. And then we can begin to talk about what cascades from that. So then what do we need to really do and emphasize in the settings where children learn and play, all of them.
Thanks, Stephanie.
To support those things.
So Patrick, you were nodding along there, and I wonder how, Stephanie mentioned research there. How important is data to guiding policymaking and practice where you are in this regard?
I feel like you just read my mind. This is good. We're off to a good start here, Duncan. One of the very old kind of sayings is where attention goes, energy flows, right? And assessing things is really important. And the reason why I'm the co-national project manager for this OECD SSES in Japan is so that we can start measuring and putting attention in this area. And once you start getting the data, you start measuring this, then you can have a real conversation. And so what I really love about what OECD is doing is, yes, I mean, in Japan, OECD is so powerful. And if Japan just moves a little bit in one direction in science or math, everybody panics. And now STEAM education is the big thing, right? And because of the OECD data that's coming out and the ranking of that. So it's so wonderful that this survey is happening, and I'm happy that and hope it's going to continue because it's going to balance this conversation and give us the data that we need. What I also really love about this OECD survey that we're doing is we're not just measuring 10-year-olds and 15-year-olds. We're also working with the parents, and we're working with the teachers, and we're working with the principals. And you need that triangle and working together. What we're working on in Japan right now is we're doing contextual questions with the parents and the teachers and the students, but they're all taking the same assessment. So they all have an awareness. And I think we're going back to what the teachers' stress and challenges, maybe a lack of awareness or a lack of understanding where they are. So I think a lot of the challenge is really getting this data and showing that our teachers are burnt out, that our teachers are leaving. And this isn't happening in Japan as well. A lot of teachers are leaving the profession. It's sad to see. And so it needs to be data driven. It really does. And that's why I'm so excited about what OECD is doing. And they're the pinnacle for the cognitive and now becoming the pinnacle for the non-cognitive. And once we start correlating these two, which is already happening, it's a powerful combination. And it's not that whole conversation, left brain, right brain, cognitive, non-cognitive. It's going to disappear, I hope, in 10, 15 years from now. So I'm really, hats off to OECD.
Thank you. Hannah will take the credit for some of that, I'm sure. A question from Vandana Punya on Facebook. How can we include social and emotional learning components as a teaching practice? Is that possible? Maybe Pedro.
Of course, nobody teaches core subjects in a vacuum. Teaching is about relationships. And you know the saying that kids don't really care about what we know until they know how much we care. So you cannot really separate things like that. It's good for discussions. It's nice for this conversation, but you cannot really separate. So that's why it's a misperception that this is an additional layer of work. It's not. It's more about the way we do our work as teachers. That's the focus. And Stephanie has mentioned that often, saying it's about the intentionality. And another challenge that I didn't point out before is how difficult it is to translate all the evidence that people like Stephanie are producing every day. We have over 40 or 50,000 papers on SEL in the last 20 years or so. And it's very hard to make them relevant for a school day of a certain teacher. Durlach, one of the researchers say, all the interventions have to be safe. They have to be, in the sense that they have to be sequenced, active, focused, and explicit. And I would add an R, safer, because they have to be relevant. So whatever we want to do has to be relevant for the subject, for the theme, for the context, for the curriculum, for the day that the kids had yesterday in their homes. It has to be relevant. And this relevancy, that's the trigger, I would say, because that would change the way the whole school approaches SEL. If it's not really, really relevant for them, it's going to be an extra or an added task, which is not. So the key to make it more integrated into the pedagogy of the teacher is to make them absolutely relevant. And there is only two different kinds of brains that can do this relevance. One are the teacher's brain, and the other one are the kid's brain. So they are the ones who, according to their own needs and expectations, they can, absorb and be more systematic on certain areas of SEL because they feel they need it. They feel it's important for them.
Thanks, Pedro. One quick question here from Louise Elliott. We are running close to out of time, but she asked, how do we create a standardized approach without a top-down approach? Do working groups exist at a national level? Anyone want to take that one? Stephanie.
I would just say that there's a place for that work in communities of practice. So I think you can have the bottom-up approach by building a community of practice that organizes around defining a target and then building a practice. And the top-down part of that is creating the opportunity to do it, the space and the value of it, and then providing some support, some scaffolds for structuring the work. But communities of practice are effective in research, and they're really good for this kind of ground-up building work that has buy-in.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. We are running close to out of time, so I'm going to ask you to give some final messages. I think in terms of solutions, really, if there was an action which you'd like people to take in particular, which you think could help improve schools becoming hubs for social and emotional skills, what would that be? Pedro, why don't we start with you?
Well, I've used that card already. My number one message would be, let's start with teachers. They really need our support.
Stephanie?
I was going to say the same thing. So let's start with teachers. They definitely need our support. And add to that, in so doing, let's show how serious we are about this work.
Hannah, if you say teachers as well, it's going to get repetitive. I'm just warning you.
No, now I have to play the data card. I would say our knowledge and our data has to catch up with the knowledge on academic achievement. And we are on a good way, but we are still not there yet. And we need to keep pushing. And we also need to use the OECD and other international platforms as a hub for learning how to do efficient social and emotional education in different parts of the world. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Hannah. And Patrick, the last word to you, the final thought. What's it going to be?
So if you do the math and you look at the number of days that children are in school and the number of hours, and you divide that by the number of hours in a year, and you average under 20% of the time that the children are in school. So actually, in many ways, the parents are the primary educators, but they're receiving, there's no license to be a parent. And there's this disconnect with schools. And so I think if the parents really got engaged and supported the teachers and really looked at this triangle and looked at this as a community and a partnership, I think we would see a lot of changes. And I would think we'd have quite a difference in the teachers' well-being as well.
Thanks so much, Patrick, and to everyone else for those final thoughts. Professor Patrick Newell from Shizuoka University in Japan, Portugal's Director General of Education, Pedro Cunha, Professor Stephanie Jones from Harvard, and the OECD's very own Hannah Elferts. It's been a fascinating discussion. I've certainly learned something. I hope you have too. If you want to learn more, please go to the OECD website, check out the OECD's survey on social and emotional skills. There's plenty more there to check out as well. Thanks to the production team. Thanks to those who joined us on Zoom and on Facebook, and for all your excellent questions. As ever, I apologize for not getting through all of them. I really tried my best. Please do join us again for another webinar in the near future. I hope to see you next time.